In 1867 Colorado, single dad Samuel Thompson shocked an entire auction crowd by paying $200 for a family of 7 bond servants, more than most earned yearly. But when he immediately tore up their contract and set them free, his act of radical compassion changed the American West forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The year was 1867, and the dusty town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado, was buzzing with the kind of excitement that came only on auction day. People had traveled from miles around to bid on everything from livestock to household goods. But today's auction was different. Today they were auctioning off people. Samuel Thompson stood at the edge of the crowd, his 8-year-old son Benjamin clinging to his hand. Samuel's weathered face showed the strain of 3 years of raising his boy alone since his wife Maria had died of fever. He'd come to town to buy supplies, not to watch human beings sold like cattle. But something about the family standing on the auction block stopped him in his tracks. There were 7 of them, a mother and 6 children ranging from a baby to what looked like a teenager. They were bond servants, people who had sold themselves into years of labor to pay off debts. The auctioneer was selling their remaining contract time to the highest bidder. "Here we have the Walsh family," the auctioneer called out. "Fine workers, all of them. The woman can cook, clean, and tend children. The older children can work fields or help with household duties. 7 years left on their contract." Samuel watched as the mother, a woman named Catherine Walsh, held her baby close while trying to keep her other children calm. Her face was proud despite their desperate circumstances, and Samuel could see she was fighting back tears as men in the crowd shouted out bids like she and her children were livestock. "$20, called out Jake Morrison, a brutal man known for working his bond servants nearly to death. "$25, shouted another voice from across the crowd. Samuel felt Benjamin tug on his sleeve. "Papa, why are those children standing up there? Why does everyone look so sad?" Samuel knelt down to his son's level, struggling with how to explain something so complicated to a child. "Those people owe money, son. They have to work for whoever buys their contract until their debt is paid." "That doesn't seem fair," Benjamin said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "No, son. It doesn't. $30. Morrison called out again, and Samuel could see the fear in Catherine Walsh's eyes. Everyone in 3 counties knew Morrison's reputation. Samuel looked at the family again. The oldest boy, probably 14, was trying to comfort his younger siblings while watching the crowd with defiant eyes. Twin girls who looked about 10 stood close together, holding hands. A boy of maybe 7 clung to his mother's skirt, and the baby in her arms couldn't have been more than 6 months old. They reminded Samuel of his own family before tragedy struck. The love between them was visible even in their desperate circumstances. $40. Morrison's voice cut through Samuel's thoughts. The auctioneer looked around the crowd. "Do I hear 45? Silence fell over the gathering. $40 was more money than most people saw in months. Morrison's cruel smile showed he thought he'd won. Samuel felt something stir in his chest, a combination of anger at the injustice and a protective instinct he didn't fully understand. Before he could think it through, he raised his hand. $100. The crowd turned to stare at Samuel in shock. $100 was an enormous sum, more than enough to buy a good horse or several head of cattle. For bond servants, it was unheard of. Morrison's face darkened with anger. $110. Samuel looked at Benjamin, who was watching the Walsh family with the same sympathetic eyes that reminded Samuel so much of his late wife. Maria had always said that when you have the power to help someone, you have the responsibility to do it. $200. Samuel called out. The crowd gasped. Even the auctioneer looked stunned. Morrison started to raise his hand again, then seemed to think better of it. $200 was more than many families earned in a year. Going once, going twice, sold to Samuel Thompson. As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring about Samuel's unexpected generosity or stupidity depending on their perspective, Samuel approached the Walsh family. Catherine was staring at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Ma'am," Samuel said, removing his hat. "I'm Samuel Thompson. This is my son Benjamin." "Catherine Walsh," she replied carefully. "These are my children, Patrick, Mary, Margaret, young Thomas, little James, and baby Sarah." She indicated each child as she spoke their names. Samuel knelt down so he was at eye level with the children. "Hello everyone. I know this is all very confusing and probably scary. But I want you to know that things are going to be different from now on." "Sir," Catherine said hesitantly, "I want to thank you for keeping us from Morrison. But I need you to understand, we'll work hard for you. We'll earn every penny of what you paid. Samuel stood up slowly. Mrs. Walsh, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't buy you to work for me. Catherine's eyes widened with confusion. I don't understand. I bought your contract so I could tear it up. The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning sank in. Catherine's knees buckled, and if Patrick hadn't caught her arm, she would have fallen. What do you mean? She whispered. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out the contract papers the auctioneer had handed him. Without ceremony, he tore them in half, then in half again, letting the pieces fall to the ground. I mean, you're free. All of you. The debt is paid and you don't owe anyone anything. Catherine began to cry, deep, shaking sobs that came from years of desperation and fear finally being released. The children didn't fully understand what was happening, but they could see their mother's tears and began to gather around her. Benjamin tugged on Samuel's sleeve again. Papa, are they going to come home with us? Samuel looked at Catherine, who was trying to compose herself. Mrs. Walsh, do you have anywhere to go? She shook her head. We lost our farm when my husband died. That's how we ended up in debt. We have no family, no home. Then yes, Benjamin. If they'd like to, they can come home with us. The ride back to Samuel's ranch was quiet except for the creaking of the wagon wheels and the soft sounds of baby Sarah occasionally fussing. Samuel had borrowed a larger wagon from a friend to transport everyone, and the Walsh children sat wide-eyed as they took in the Colorado landscape. Samuel's ranch was modest but well-maintained. He had a main house with 3 bedrooms, a barn, and about 50 head of cattle. It was enough to support him and Benjamin comfortably, but adding 7 more people would stretch their resources considerably. As they pulled up to the house, Samuel began to worry that he'd acted too hastily. What did he know about raising 6 additional children? How would he feed everyone? Where would they all sleep? But when he saw Benjamin already chatting excitedly with young Thomas Walsh about the chickens in the yard, Samuel knew he'd made the right choice. Mrs. Walsh, Samuel said as he helped her down from the wagon, I want you to know that this is your home now. Not temporarily, not until you find somewhere else to go. This is home. Catherine looked at the house, small but sturdy with flowers planted around the porch and curtains in the windows. It was more than she dared to hope for. Mr. Thompson, I don't know how to repay you for this kindness. You don't need to repay anything. But if you're willing, I could use help running this place. Not as servants but as, well, as family. That first night, they all sat around Samuel's kitchen table sharing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and vegetables from his garden. It was cramped with 9 people around a table meant for 4, but nobody complained. Mr. Thompson, Patrick said during dinner, why did you help us? You don't even know us. Samuel considered the question while he helped Benjamin cut his cornbread. Son, 3 years ago my wife died of fever. Benjamin and I were left alone and I thought our world had ended. But we survived because good people helped us when we needed it most. Today I had the chance to be that help for someone else. But $200, Catherine said. That's so much money. Money comes and goes, Samuel replied. But doing the right thing, that stays with you forever. The early days were challenging. The house was crowded and they had to figure out sleeping arrangements. Samuel gave up his bedroom to Catherine and the baby, while the other children shared the remaining bedrooms. Samuel slept in the barn, insisting he preferred it anyway. Food was stretched thin until Samuel could plan for feeding so many people. But everyone pitched in. Catherine turned out to be an excellent cook who could make a little go a long way. Patrick was strong for his age and helped with the cattle. The twins, Mary and Margaret, took care of the chickens and helped tend the garden. Even 7-year-old Thomas found ways to help by gathering eggs and feeding the pigs. What surprised Samuel most was how quickly they all became a real family. Benjamin, who had been lonely for so long, now had siblings to play with and learn from. The Walsh children, who had lived in constant fear and uncertainty, began to relax and act like children again. But not everyone in Cedar Ridge was happy with Samuel's decision. 3 weeks after the auction, Samuel was in town buying supplies when Jake Morrison confronted him outside the general store. Thompson, what you did was foolish, Morrison snarled. Those bond servants belonged to whoever paid for them. You had no right to set them free. I had every right, Samuel replied calmly. I paid for their contract, which meant I could do whatever I wanted with it. You've set a dangerous precedent. Other bond servants might get ideas about being freed. It could disrupt the whole system. Samuel looked Morrison in the eye. If treating people with dignity disrupts the system, then maybe the system needs to be disrupted. Morrison's face reddened with anger. You'll regret this, Thompson. Mark my words. Samuel didn't respond, but he kept Morrison's threat in mind as he loaded his supplies and headed home. The threat became real 2 months later when Samuel woke up to find his barn on fire. He and Patrick managed to save most of the animals, but they lost valuable hay and equipment. There was no proof Morrison was responsible, but everyone in town knew who had done it. Instead of being intimidated, Samuel's neighbors surprised him. Within a week, families from around the area had donated hay, tools, and lumber to help rebuild. The message was clear. The community supported what Samuel had done. "I don't understand," Catherine said as they watched neighbors working together to rebuild the barn. "Why are people helping us?" Samuel smiled as he watched Benjamin and Thomas playing with the other children while the adults worked. "Because what we're doing here, building a real family, treating everyone with respect, it reminds people of what's important." As autumn turned to winter, the Thompson-Walsh household settled into comfortable routines. The children all attended the local school, where they excelled despite their interrupted education. Catherine and Samuel worked together to manage the ranch, their partnership growing stronger each day. It was during the first winter that Samuel realized his feelings for Catherine had grown beyond friendship and mutual respect. She was intelligent, kind, and devoted to all the children, not just her own. Watching her read bedtime stories to Benjamin with the same love she showed her own children made Samuel's heart ache with longing. But he worried about approaching the subject. Catherine and her children had been through so much trauma and upheaval. The last thing Samuel wanted was to make her feel pressured or obligated. The decision was taken out of his hands on Christmas Eve. Samuel had spent weeks secretly carving toys for all the children, working in the barn after everyone was asleep. Catherine had been equally secretive, sewing new clothes for everyone from fabric she'd carefully saved money to buy. After the children had opened their presents and were playing contentedly, Catherine approached Samuel by the fireplace. "Samuel," she said softly, "can I speak with you privately?" They stepped out onto the porch, where snow was falling gently in the moonlight. "I wanted to thank you," Catherine began, "for giving us the most wonderful Christmas we've ever had." "Catherine, you don't need to thank me. This is your home." "That's what I wanted to talk about." Catherine took a deep breath. "When you freed us from that contract, you gave us back our lives. When you brought us here, you gave us safety. When you welcomed us into your family, you gave us love." Samuel waited, not sure where she was leading. "What I'm trying to say is, I love you, Samuel. Not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you're a good man who's shown me and my children what it means to be truly cared for." Samuel felt his heart skip. "Catherine, I've been hoping to hear those words for months. I love you too. I love all of you." They were married in the spring of 1868, in a ceremony that brought together people from across the territory. The Walsh children officially took the Thompson name, though they had been family in every way that mattered for almost a year. The story of Samuel Thompson and the family he freed spread throughout the West. It became a symbol of hope during a time when the country was struggling to heal from civil war and define what freedom really meant. Years later, when Patrick Thompson became a successful rancher himself, he would tell his own children about the day a stranger spent his life savings to buy their freedom. When the twins, Mary and Margaret, became teachers, they shared the story with their students as an example of how one person's courage could change everything. Benjamin Thompson grew up to become a lawyer who specialized in helping people escape unfair labor contracts. He always said his sense of justice came from watching his father tear up that contract and set 7 people free. Ann Thomas, who had been just 7 years old when Samuel bought their family, became a preacher who traveled throughout the territory sharing the message that love and compassion were more powerful than money or laws. But it was baby Sarah who perhaps understood the story best. Though she was too young to remember the auction, she grew up hearing the tale of how Papa Samuel had saved them all. When she was older, she would ask him why he had spent so much money on strangers. Samuel's answer was always the same: because sometimes the most important thing you can buy isn't something for yourself. Sometimes it's freedom for someone else. The Thompson Ranch prospered over the years, not just financially but in the ways that truly mattered. It became known throughout Colorado as a place where anyone in need could find help. Samuel and Catherine took in orphan children, helped families who had lost their farms, and provided work for people who couldn't find it elsewhere. When Samuel died peacefully in 1892, surrounded by his wife, children, and grandchildren, his funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. The preacher read from a letter Samuel had written to be opened after his death. "I spent $200 at an auction in 1867, and people said I was crazy. They said I threw my money away on strangers. But I didn't buy strangers that day. I bought my family. I bought my future. I bought the chance to be the man my wife Maria always believed I could be. That $200 was the best investment I ever made because it bought me a lifetime of love. The story of Samuel Thompson became legend throughout the American West. It was told around campfires and in schoolhouses, passed down from generation to generation as a reminder that one person's act of courage and compassion could ripple outward to change the world. In an era when people were often valued by their economic worth, Samuel had shown that true value came from recognizing the humanity in others. In a time when might often made right, he had proven that love was stronger than law. And in a place where families were often torn apart by circumstance, poverty, and injustice, he had shown that the strongest families were those built not on blood alone, but on the conscious choice to care for one another. The little town of Cedar Ridge erected a statue of Samuel Thompson in the town square in 1900. The inscription reads, "In memory of a man who understood that the greatest wealth comes not from what we own, but from whom we choose to love." But perhaps the most fitting memorial to Samuel's legacy was the family itself. The Thompson children and grandchildren continued to live by the principles he had taught them, that every person deserves dignity, that family is about love rather than blood, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone else find their freedom. Years after Samuel's death, when historians wrote about the settlement of the American West, they often focused on the big events: the gold rushes, the railroad building, the Indian Wars. But the story of Samuel Thompson reminded people that history was also made in small moments, by ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things. The auction that day in 1867 had lasted only minutes. But the love that Samuel Thompson bought with his $200 lasted for generations, proving that the most valuable things in life can't be measured in money, but only in the depth of human kindness and the courage to act on love. In the end, Samuel Thompson had indeed shocked the whole West, not through violence or grand gestures, but through the simple, revolutionary act of treating other human beings as family. And in doing so, he had shown that the greatest freedom any person can give is the freedom to be loved unconditionally.